This is the Above Average Podcast, and you are listening because you want an above average life. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Above Average Podcast, the podcast where we talk to above average people about their above average lives. Now today I have a friend of mine who I've known for probably about 10 years?
14 years.
14 years.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous, and I'm old. So, Miss Carla Jackson, welcome to the Above Average Podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad.
Fantastic. So today we're talking about neurodiversity more so because you just started up your own little project.
I
right?
did.
Is it a project or is it a business? What would you class it as?
Oh, well, at the moment it's a project, but business eventually.
Amazing. So touch wood. So tell me a bit about what you're actually doing and why you're doing it.
Okay, so at the moment I have a project called Divergent Carla. I call myself the Neurodiversity Educator because I want to educate people on neurodiversity, something that's quite close to my heart. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 23 years old.
Yeah.
Found a lot of struggles, a lot of unique challenges that went with it. Found that there wasn't the best resources online, wasn't a great amount of support, and I really want to change that, and I want to be the voice that I wish that I'd had maybe when I was going through diagnosis. So that's the ethos of what my project is. So at the moment I'm doing a bit of public speaking, I'm doing a bit of blogging, trying to do a little bit of workshops. So yeah, that's where I'm.
So you basically took it all. You just hit the ground running with everything.
More or less. Like I created my business Instagram account literally 4 weeks ago, and that was only because I was doing public speaking that you very kindly set me up behind my back.
We're all about sharing here at the Above Average.
Of course.
Podcast.
So yeah, I literally made it because I was like, right, well, if I'm going to do this public speaking, people are going to have to know where to find me, and they're gonna have to have an Instagram. And then so I set it up purely for that purpose, and then oh my god, the following I got pretty much overnight. Don't get me wrong, I haven't got a huge following, I'm not in the thousands
6.7 million. She's beat Kylie Jenner, did you know that?
What, the emo Kylie Jenner? But yeah, so, and like I said, I've only had it up for about maybe a month, and the support and the stories I've heard so far has been quite insane, actually. Yeah.
So tell me a bit about the public speaking, because obviously I was there for that. So how did it feel because obviously I've done several talks myself. How does it feel doing your first one? How did you feel as someone who, as someone who's never ever done it before or done anything sort of like that? How did it feel to do that?
Well, for the first sort of 2-3 minutes, I thought, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing? I was stood there and I was going, oh my God, there's so many people looking at me. And I thought, what's going to happen? Am I going to forget my words? What if I ramble? What if I go off script? Which did happen, by the way. I went completely over time. But then I actually got into it.
And then decided to rinse me halfway through.
I did.
Yeah. About my hairline, didn't you?
Well, if you can't rinse your friends, then friends
exactly.
will.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, no, it was amazing. I mean, if there's anything I like to do is talk. Haven't done it in front of 25, 26 people that were there, but oh my God, I absolutely loved doing it. I got at the end of it and I was just like, oh my God, I want to do this all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing though. So obviously with having ADHD and that, it's one of those things where people always say I would run out of things to say. That's big. Most people's biggest worry when they go on stage is I'm going to run out of things to say. I'm going to forget my lines or whatever, right? With ADHD, you don't have that. It's kind of people don't understand. One of my favorite speakers is a guy called Owen Coogan. He has he believes he has some form of autism. He's never got checked, but basically he goes with one quote and he'll do a 3-hour seminar based off this one thing, and he'll just riff because he has no concept of time, and his brain just goes in overload. But what he says and what you said at your talk makes sense. It's not just ramblings. It was stuff that is almost most people could not connect those dots as well as someone with it. You think ADHD and you think, oh, scatterbrain, everything's everywhere. But when you get them focused on a specific thing, it's they are a master in their field. So I want to talk a little bit about your sort of experience with ADHD and your diagnosis. Can you take me back through? I tell you what, let's start at sort of school time. Did you notice anything when you were in school, growing up? What was school like for you?
So, funnily enough, I'd say the first sort of 8 years of my life were very, very bright. I did not have an inkling that I had anything wrong with me. I knew that I was
quote
different.
Unquote wrong. For those listening, quote unquote wrong, yeah.
I had I was always told that there was something different about me by family members, but it wasn't different as in like a bad way. So I think I said at my talk that there was something called Mensa, which for those who don't know is a high IQ society. It's still going now, but it became very prominent sort of in the early 2000s. Which is basically if you were in like the top 1% of IQ in the world. So if you have above average IQ, you could join Mensa.
I see what you did there. Above average, yeah.
I mean, that was totally unintentional, but you know, if the boot fits. And so I remember like in the playground and people would go like, it was sort of like the inside joke would be like, oh, like, have you heard of Mensa? Like, oh yeah, I'm so clever, I could join Mensa. Like there's a lot of like just weird like banter like that on the playground. And then because obviously didn't know I was neurodivergent at the time and we tend to take things literally, I was just like, oh, I'm going to see what this Mensa is. And I like went on like this massive 90s computer that my mom and dad had at home, and I typed it in and it was like, because at the time there was a huge focus on like child prodigies and like gifted kids. I remember doing like the IQ test, and to get in it you had to have like 130 IQ points. I think the average is around 100 to about 115, I think.
Right.
And I remember doing the test and I got 145 and I was just like,
wow.
And I was like, shit. So, and I was like, so I've not only met the criteria for Mensa, like I'm almost higher.
You've smashed the criteria, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to call it that. But retrospectively, at the time I had something called hyperlexia. So if you think of dyslexia, for example, you have tend to have struggles with reading, with comprehension, with spelling, with identifying language, things like that. Yeah. Back then I had sort of like the flip side. So I was very, very gifted in things like language and speaking and spelling and telling stories. Like there's a picture of me when I'm about 18 months old, two years old, and I'm reading a newspaper. If I can
flipping through the political side. Oh, was it page 3 or was it actual newspaper?
That's a story for another time, Adam. But no, this is in like what 1999. Yeah. I'm sure my age, yeah. But yeah, and then so I was just like, oh, and I thought that was it, like I'm set, you know, like I've got this high IQ, and my mum and dad were like, oh, she's going to be a doctor, she's going to be a lawyer, she's going to be a scientist, she's going to cure global warming, like all of like these major things. And so I was like, right,
I like the aspirations that they had for you there as well. I mean, she's going to cure global warming.
Quite a progressive family, as you can tell. And then so primary school like was pretty good, and then I got to secondary school. I want to say, I think I started noticing when I was about 14 or 15. And I would just sit down and I would look at like a worksheet that a teacher had given me, and I'm just like, this is not going in. And I don't know why it's not going in, but it just isn't. Like I can recognize the words on the page. I know exactly what it's telling me to do, but the brain power is just not there. Like I physically can't make myself do it, and I don't know why. So for the longest time I was just like, oh, well, this is it. Like I'm lazy. Like I obviously don't give a shit about school. Like I obviously don't care about the work that I'm doing. My mum and dad were very frustrated. I mean, like they were only, you know, regurgitating the information that they had available at the time. Like back then when I was 14, God, like it would have been like the early 2010s. Like obviously the things like ADHD and autism and things like that were flying around, but no one had a concrete concept of what that really meant, especially for girls, like especially for a woman. Like I was 14, 15 years old. I was predicted like all A stars and A's, and I remember just looking at it, and most people would look at that and think, oh, that's aspirational, oh my god, like people think I can get to that level. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm not gonna make it. Like I just know that I'm not gonna make it. Like I would see the expectation and I would feel crushed, and I'd be like, I just know I'm not gonna get it. And it's not because I don't have the knowledge. I do have the knowledge, I just, for whatever reason, I can't implement it. I can't focus. I'm getting distracted in class. And when I say distracted, I don't mean like big things like the fire alarm going off, but I could be sat here and someone could sneeze on the other side of the room, and that would be it. Like my trail of thought on what I was doing would be gone.
Pulls you out your focus.
100%. And then I would find it even more difficult to get back on track with what I was doing. Same with revision. I remember like people would come out with like their revision schedule, and they would have like pretty cool highlighters and like all like fancy writing and have like sticky notes and stuff. And I'd be like, oh yeah, like that's cool. But like I genuinely thought everyone's faking this. Like everyone is faking it. Like how much revision they do. Surely because
you know so funny as well. I never used highlighters or anything. I never like blocked things out. I didn't have post-it notes. I was literally like, I'm gonna read this and read this and read this and read this, and that's how it's gonna sink in, you know. But no, I never had highlighters as well, so I'm with you on that one.
Fair enough. But honestly, I was doing absolutely zilch in terms of revision. I was, and the reason why is because, I mean, procrastination is a huge thing for someone with ADHD. I mean, the average person struggles with it, let alone someone who can't maintain focus for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And so my mum and dad would be like, oh, so have you been doing much revising today? And I would lie through my back teeth about how much revision that I'd done. I mean, everyone does that to an extent.
Yeah.
And then I remember I actually did my GCSEs. And funnily enough, like, my GCSEs were decent. So I got an A star, 4 A's, 3 B's and 2 C's.
Yeah.
And the average person, they'd be like, oh, like, that's really good. And I remember looking at it and going, it's not all A's. My mum and dad are going to kill me. And so I remember bringing it home and my mum was pretty like, oh no, like, you did your best. But my dad, because he had such high expectations for me and he knew the potential that I had, like, I could just see in his face, like, he just felt crushed. And that to me crushed me, and I was just like, I don't know how I'm gonna move forward with this. So it was hard. Like, I remember going to GPs at the time and I was just like, no, you don't understand, I can't focus, I'm getting distracted. Like, oh, well, that happens with everyone, you know, like, everyone gets distracted. I was like, yeah, people get distracted, but they can quite easily move their focus back to the thing that they were doing. Like, if I'm distracted, it will take me off on a completely different tangent that no one else would have thought to do. So for example, like, I remember there was one time I was trying to do some revision in the living room, and then my dad was doing some dishes, and you could like faintly hear it. And I remember getting up and be like, oh, Dad, have I told you about the time that I washed dishes in my part-time job? And like, oh yeah, and then it just sort of like developed from there, and it went on and on and on, and then I remember going like, what the fuck was I just doing? Like, and it was hard, and things like ADHD weren't around back then.
Well, they were, but no one had any idea what it was. Now, you said something in your speech about you asked everyone what they think of what they think of when they think of ADHD. Now, what was that you everyone thought?
So I said, what do you think of when you think of ADHD? And there was a guy in the front row who said, you just think of someone really, really hyper, like someone a lot younger. And I said, would it be fair to say that you would envision a 7-year-old boy? And he went, no, I think it would. And then everyone agreed. And I was like, when you think of ADHD, do you think of a 25-year-old woman? And he was like, no, definitely not. So if that's the idea that people have now, when we're living in quite a knowledgeable, quite progressive society, back then, people weren't going to have a clue.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
why do people get it wrong, do you think, when people think ADHD? Is it just the fact that there's a misconception around what it actually is? Are people just not educated on it? Is it not portrayed very well in sort of media and films and TV? Like, where do you think it is that people go wrong with ADHD?
I think it's a bit of everything, really. So big misconception. So that boys only have it and that guys only have it, and the difference between men and women with ADHD is that men tend, in my experience anyway, men tend to process things outwards, like they're a lot more action orientated. So when they're having symptoms like unable to focus, or they're feeling hyper, or struggling to stay still, or stay on task, that is a lot more obvious because they're jumping out of their seat and they're walking around and being a little bit disruptive in class. Women, in my experience, internalize things like they process things internally. So if a woman's struggling to focus, or like the feeling quite hyperactive, that's not going to show. And women, I've found, tend to have more mental hyperactivity than they do physical hyperactivity. Like, if I could rename ADHD tomorrow, I would, because it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Hyperactivity is a key word there, because when you think hyper, you think physically hyper. There's mental hyperactivity, like that's a huge thing as well. And attention deficit doesn't sum up what it actually is. Like, because you look at it and you think like, oh, I can't pay attention in the hyper. It is so much more than that, because we don't have a deficit of attention, we have a dysregulation of attention. Because if we had a deficit of attention, we wouldn't be able to focus on anything.
Yeah.
But we can. It's a very black and white. We either cannot focus to save our life, or we're hyper focused on something.
Yeah.
So hyper focus in a sense is very powerful, you know, is a great thing, because if you're researching something that you're passionate about, or you're in a job that you really like you can like put full power into that you can go full steam ahead with your focus. But if it's something fairly minor, like chores, or remembering to do something, or keeping a budget, or keeping a to-do list of things that you need, it's a lot harder. And I think the main thing that people get wrong is that we're just being lazy, or like we just can't do it, and like that is like the total opposite. Like, I've not met a single person with ADHD that doesn't try it, and the thing is, like, we do try, but it's what looks like trying to us doesn't like trying to everyone else. So I'll give you a perfect example.
Okay.
So say if we had like a hot stove on the table right now. I mean, you probably think, where the hell's that stove come from?
Dangerous. But there is one. There's a hot plate downstairs. I can go get it if it's there.
well, in the interest of safety, we won't. But so if I said to you, right, Adam, I want you to put your hand down on that hot stove, right?
Right.
What's your brain gonna do?
No, because I'm gonna get a burnt hand. Yeah. Right.
Your brain is gonna physically stop you. But if I go, oh well, it's simply easy. You just pick up your hand, you put it down. You've got the motor skills to do it. Physically, you can put your hand down. What's the problem?
Right.
Yeah, your brain stops you from doing it, right? There's a mechanism in your brain that stops you from doing it.
Yeah, because it knows you're going to get hurt, right? Yeah.
People with ADHD, right, that is what happens in their brain when they know they should do something. There's something in their brain that stops them from doing it. Because a lot of people think, well, why can't you just do it? Like, you can motivate yourself to do, which is quite a problem if you're in the motivational space, if you're in the self-help space, because we talk a lot about motivation and like, oh, just do it, or we talk about discipline, like, just do it. But that is assuming that the person is like has the ability in the brain to motivate themselves.
Yeah, is quote unquote normal, has a normal. Yeah.
Whereas I remembered like even now, like I can say like a massive pile of washing or a pile of dishes, and in my brain I was like, oh yes, I know I should do this, but as soon as I go to do it, there's something in my brain that goes, nah. Like, brain stops it from doing it. If you put me in front of a Lord of the Rings book or something like that, it is like there's something in my brain. Like, my brain doesn't have like the bicycle brakes to stop myself from doing it. So.
What I was going to say was, it's very common that you find that people with autism or something like ADHD gravitate towards a lot of nerdy, but nerdy complex. Like, like obviously, if I asked you about Lord of the Rings, you would literally tell me so much lore until my ears started bleeding, right? But it's that in itself is an incredible skill that most people don't have. But that's not really, rewarded so much. It's kind of looked at a bit strange. But if you could take, like, a lot of people say, I wish I could just take all this knowledge in, right, about something that they really care about. People with ADHD fucking spawn. I've met a lot of people who and I don't know why off topic, but they do a very sort of nasally, sort of like this kind of voice. I don't know where that comes. I really don't know where that comes from. Or American as well. I don't know whether it's just because a lot of nerdy stuff is American these days. I don't know where that comes from, but they do tend to know a lot. Like, obviously I know a lot. You ask me about Star Wars, shit, my voice will change. I'll go nerdy voice. I will tell you everything about. I watched a video. There's a great guy on YouTube called Star Wars Theory. Right, amazing channel if you love Star Wars. Right.
Okay. People
instantly just turn this podcast off. Now, fuck this.
It's now a bad time to say I've never seen Star Wars.
Well, we'll talk about that afterwards. Have fun getting the bus home. But he was basically talking about the video I watched was like what Darth Vader's suit actually was like, and I remember all that shit. I'm not ADHD, but I was like, I fucking love this thing. And it's like, if you could imagine if we could take the people with ADHD who had like a specific interest in something, like they would make amazing, like if you were a doctor or something, right, with ADHD. I don't know whether that's a good thing. I don't know how that should work. I'm just speculating. But if you knew everything about how everything worked and you could meticulously plan out because that was your thing, like, that would be incredible, wouldn't it? Like, do you know what I mean? Was that going to work that way?
And the reason for that is, I mean, like you've talked about this before, dopamine is a huge thing. Because when I say we don't have a deficit, we have a dysregulation. Dopamine feeds into that. So a neurotypical person they get a little dopamine hit after they complete a task. So even if it's something simple like washing the dishes, getting that assignment done, whatever it is, a neurotypical person is motivated to do that because they know they get a dopamine hit at the end of it. We don't. ADHD people do not get. Our dopamine levels work very differently. However, if you look at an ADHD brain, the dopamine spikes way higher than what a neurotypical brain can spike in dopamine when they talk about a special interest or something that they're hyperfixated on. So that is why ADHD people, when it comes to talking, like what you just said, is very hit or miss. Because if you ask me to, recite, I don't know, a shopping list or some really detailed information, financial information, like I often have to do at work, I'm just like, mate, like this is not going in. Like it doesn't matter how many times I read that, it's not going in. Ask me about Game of Thrones. Oh my god, right, okay, so this person does this, in the books this happens, and George R. R. Martin did this. It's because like the dopamine levels aren't leveling out. Like we respond to stimuli very differently, and so the dopamine levels in our brain respond to stimuli differently. And so, but it's interesting what you said about like if we could just channel that sort of energy and that talent into other things, which sort of is interesting, because I feel like, so not just ADHD, but with autism, other neurodivergent conditions.
I'm sorry. When you say neurodivergent, what fits into that for someone that doesn't know what it is?
Okay, so neurodivergent. So a neurodivergent brain is any brain that doesn't work the normal way, like the way that we see everyone's society, like the brain type that society tends to favour, right?
Okay.
So neurodivergent can include things like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's, OCD, sensory processing disorder. Anything that makes your brain work differently and not optimally for society is what is considered neurodivergent.
Okay,
and
cool.
You can quite clearly see if you take like a neurotypical brain and a neurodivergent brain, whether that's an ADHD brain, autism brain, whatever it is, the structure's different in the way that parts of the brain talk to each other are different.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean by neurodivergent.
Cool. Just thought I'd clarify that for everyone.
But no, like so my ADHD
brain's
kicking in again. What was the question?
So we were talking about the ideal working environment. So like how if we could channel people's ADHD into like life better, then it would make more sense.
So I've noticed is that someone with ADHD or autism, like I'm just going to use, because those are the two main ones that people tend to have heard of, right? So if your special interest or hyperfixation is something that is beneficial for society, you're seen as a genius, right? Steve Jobs, for example, we don't know if he actually was neurodivergent. Like I'm not aware that he was diagnosed with anything, but the way that his brain worked, because his focus and his fixation was on technology, something that is seen as better in society, he was seen as a genius, he was seen as an entrepreneur, he was seen as this amazing person, right? So if you take that brain, but they're like something a bit more obscure, trains, stamps.
Well, that guy on TikTok went viral, that Francis something for train spotting, didn't he? And he was weird, but like in a cool way. He made me want to watch trains. But it's mad, because then if your fixation of your focus is something that's not deemed beneficial for society, you're seen as weird, you're seen as nerdy, you're seen as like people look at you differently, like if you're a nerd, and it's weird because like, and being a nerd is cool, insofar that it makes you look good. If you're a nerd in terms of like this is for your own personal enjoyment, then you're seen as a bit weird, which I think is quite a telling thing about society. Like it's you're not seen as, you're only viewed favorably if the traits that you have can contribute to society in a way, or seen to contribute to society, so, which is but if you look at it on its own, like there's so many strengths. Like every type of brain has its strengths and has its challenges. So for example, like you said earlier, if I have a thought, I don't just have one singular thought. It's a thought that has a sub-thought that has a thought that has a thought that has a thought that has a thought, and it becomes like a landmine of information, like a spider web. But at the same time, if something's asked of me that doesn't fit neatly into that spider web, it's like, oh crap, like it's
it's a lot more difficult.
Yeah. So when we say like being, obviously if we go back to autism or something like that, when someone says, like, I'm just curious if you know this, when we say being on the spectrum, right? Because people might say, oh, he's definitely on the spectrum, or they're definitely on the spectrum, whatever. What classifies someone as autistic, or what classifies someone as just having those tendencies? Like, where do you draw the line when you in the diagnosis?
Yeah. So first of all, I hate the term. This might be a bit controversial. I hate the term when someone says, oh, well, we're all a bit on the spectrum. We're not all a bit on the spectrum, right? Because when we say, if we're all on the spectrum, then nobody's on the spectrum, right? There needs to be like a line.
Because then there wouldn't be a spectrum. It would just be the way everyone was in different ways. Yeah,
exactly. And when we think of a spectrum as well, like, most people tend to think of like a linear line, so going from just mildly on the spectrum to severely on the spectrum, like we think of it as like a 1 to 10 scale, whereas actually the spectrum again looks a bit more like a spider web, right? So it has intersections, and if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Like, no two autistic people are the same. So when you think of the autism spectrum, you tend to think of things like they really need routine. They take things literally. They have social deficits because they communicate differently. They have very fixed interests. They tend to have sensory issues, whether that's something like they can't eat certain types of food because if the texture's off, it just sends their brain into panic. Tend to get overwhelmed easily. Tend to have very, not all the time, tend to not like change, tend to have a certain way of thinking, tend to have, I think the main one is like, when you see someone and like you say, you think, oh, like they're a bit on the spectrum, it tend to be because they live in their own sort of social world. Like, their idea of social communication and someone else's is probably completely different.
Right.
So someone can have autistic traits.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm not aware of like the full number, but in order to be diagnosed with autism, there's like a set amount of symptoms that you typically recognize in someone with autism. And with anything that you can be diagnosed with, you have to fit a certain amount of symptoms or certain things that are obvious in your life.
Criteria. Yeah.
So say, for example, I mean, this isn't a correct number, but just off the top of my head, say if there are 10 symptoms associated with a disorder or a difference or whatever it is, and you have to meet 7 out of those 10 criteria, then you see it's like, yep, you've been diagnosed with this. But the average person might have 3. So technically they do have autistic traits, but they don't have enough to be considered autistic.
Right. Yeah.
So but that's the thing, like, there's so many different things that come into play, because another thing that comes on the like one of the symptoms of being on the spectrum is that like they dislike change. Yeah. But I know loads of people who don't like change. It doesn't mean they're autistic.
I get really grumpy when I get knocked out of my routine. I'm like a fucking grump. Like, we went on holiday and stuff, and like for the first day in a new place, completely new, and I'm just like a fucking mess. Like, I can't think of anything. I'm miserable. I'm hungry all the time. I don't know why, but it's like that could be considered a trait, most likely, but it doesn't mean I'm autistic. You know what I mean?
And this is the thing, like, in order to be diagnosed with something, pardon me, or in order to have something affect your life to the extent that autism can, it's not just the odd trait, it's a combination of quite a lot of traits, which then sort of creates the package, if you like, of what an autistic person looks like. But yeah, and so like, and this is the thing, so say because there is evidence to suggest that there's a genetic element as well. So say, for example, if you have parent A and parent B, right, and they have, one of them has 3 symptoms or 3 traits that are on the spectrum, and the other parent has 4 or 5, right? Totally different, right? That's not enough for them individually to be diagnosed with autism. But if you inherit all of those traits from both parents, and then you cross the threshold of how many symptoms you have, so that add together, you have like 8 or 9, that that is what contributes to someone being diagnosed. So like 2 parents can have autistic traits, but then if you inherit both of those traits, and then that puts you like, oh well, I've now got 8 symptoms where my parents only have 4. That's the difference. So
interesting. Well, obviously it's becoming more and more common to have these pop up, like, oh, someone's got autism, someone's got ADHD, etc., etc. But one of the things that I have a problem with is self-diagnosis.
Okay.
So people who like you said, might have 3 traits and then be like, oh, well, I clearly have autism because I have this. I clearly have OCD because I wash my hands on repeat. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, where do you stand on the whole self-diagnosis thing? Like, is it valuable? Is it not? Should people do it? Like, where do you stand on that personally?
So for me, pardon me, it's quite a nuanced conversation, self-diagnosis, right? Because you have some people who are like, self-diagnosis is not valid in the slightest. You need to be diagnosed by a medical professional. You need to have evidence, tend to be on that side of things. But then on the flip side, like what you said, there are also some people who are very quick to be like you said, like, oh, just because I wash my hands a lot means I have OCD. Yeah. So my opinion on self-diagnosis falls in the middle. So, for example, a lot of people don't have access to an assessment, put it that way, especially nowadays, especially if you live in a rural area. So I was talking to a lady a few weeks ago, and she lives in quite a rural area, like not quite far away from the main sort of town or city, you would say. And she has a son that she suspects had autism. She's looking at a 7-year waiting list.
Wow.
Like for a diagnosis. And it's very clear, like from the challenges that a little boy has, that, you know, this is clearly what it is. But because they don't have access to an assessment, they don't have that privilege of being diagnosed. In that case, self-diagnosis is needed because, you know, if you think about any even like physical disorders or physical ailments, right? If you've got a broken leg and you walk around with a broken leg, it's not as if you don't have the broken leg until you're diagnosed. Like, you have it without a doctor looking at you saying, like, this is what you've got. So we need to sort of... so in that case, and especially if you look at people in America as well, because the American healthcare system is very, very different to ours. It is, and you have to pay. I mean, obviously, like, private diagnosis is a thing, but in America, that's the default for everyone, unless you've got decent insurance. And so if you're from a working class family, you are not going to have the money to go to a top psychiatrist, right? So self-diagnosis for me is valid because I think a lot of people, when they think of self-diagnosis, they think of what you just said, like, oh, I've watched one TikTok video and it said, like, oh, I'm using dystrophic, that means I have ADHD. And don't get me wrong, like, that does happen, like, those people do exist. But at the same time, I know a lot of people who are self-diagnosed ADHD, autism, OCD, depression, bipolar, like, whatever it is. But it's because they have genuine reason to. They either don't have access to an assessment and they can't get diagnosed, or a lot of people are still living with their parents, and if their parents think they're absolutely fine, if you're under 18, you often need a parent's supervision,
you do,
or you know, their approval or like their permission to have an assessment done. So a lot of people that I know who are self-diagnosed have rigorously gone through all the symptoms that they have researched things like the DSM, which is the diagnostic criteria for psychiatric disorders or whatever you want to call them, because they simply don't have access to an assessment. And that's the thing though, like, so if you know that you're very clearly different, so if you think you have ADHD or autism, but because you don't have the paper, you don't have it written down to say, this is what it is, it doesn't make your struggle any less hard. Just like I said, like with a broken leg, like just because you haven't had a doctor look at you and go like, that's a broken leg, it doesn't mean that you're not limping around. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. So we need to try and strike a balance between self-diagnose and just because you meet one symptom or because you seem to have tendencies of one thing, and no, you definitely don't have this unless you have it written down. So I think self-diagnosis does get a bit of a bad rap in the media because 90%, I would say, like the vast majority of people I see who are self-diagnosed aren't self-diagnosing because they want to look cool, like they don't, because they want to look trendy. It's because they don't have the answers, and they know intrinsically that they have something, but because they don't have the access to medical care, to a psychiatrist, whatever it is, it's simply not an option for them. So I think those people, we need to really cut them some slack.
Well, there's also those people, like you said there, that is exactly my next question, is it's very common for people to say, I've got this I've got ADHD, I've got autism, I've got dyslexia because I can't do this or that, and self-diagnose. But it's also becomes a huge part of people's identity. People identify a lot, obviously, rightly so, with their mental health or with any issues that they have.
Yeah.
But do you think it's got to a point where it's almost like can be used as a scapegoat or an excuse or to look cool or for attention? Like, because obviously you look at the TikTok generation, nearly every other TikTok you scroll, someone's making a joke about their BPD or their depression or anxiety hit me today. And do you know what I mean? It's either it's more common than we ever realize, or there's a vast majority of people who are doing it because they think they get something from it, or it's an excuse for a certain behavioral trait. Now, obviously, you don't know, right? Because it's like one voice gets lost in the wilderness. Like one person who has it is surrounded by 20 people who think it's cool to have it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, what's your opinion on the sort of that culture? There's people that do say I've got this, but they've got no diagnosis. They haven't looked into it as much. They've taken one thing and said, well, I must have this, and I'm going to make it a massive part of my identity specifically. Like, where do you stand on that?
So for me, I mean, social media we have a lot to thank social media for in terms of awareness and diagnosis, because now a lot more people than ever are getting diagnosed with things that they previously wouldn't have known about because the awareness isn't there. So people very much use social media as a tool for those sorts of things. And I'll be honest, like, social media played a part in me thinking, I might actually have this. So in that sense, it is very much a good thing. But on the flip side, social media is almost the toilet of the internet, you know, like there's
a lot of shit floating around.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to 2010 Tumblr days, where, I mean,
God,
like we're going back a bit now.
We've got on a Tumblr, guys. Hold on to yourself.
No. Yeah, you can tell which generation we're from.
I had a Tumblr account, actually. I did, yeah.
But the romanticization of mental disorders, whatever it is, has always been there. And I am 100% against that because, and again, like, this is what it comes down to in the media. Because if you have a lot of media portrayals around you that sees a mental disorder or mental illness or a neurodivergent condition as cool, people are going to go, oh, I want to step on that.
Yeah.
But the reality is so very different. So, for example, one of the things I brought up in my talk was Rain Man. Have you ever seen the film?
Rain Man. Excellent film.
So Rain Man, at the time, was quite groundbreaking in terms of it helped bring autism, but specifically autistic men, to the forefront of people's minds, because before then it was almost like hidden away. It's like, oh yeah, have you heard about Susan's son? He's got autism. So that was very much the thing, and it still is not, like, now to an extent. But at the time, Rain Man was when you watch the film, he can count cards. You know, like, he has an unbelievable memory. He has all of these great things, and so people look at that and be like, oh well, I want to identify with that, like, I'm intelligent.
You still look at people say that now. It's like, oh, so you can count cards, are you like Rain Man? It's
exactly. Like, it's become such an ingrained part of media and of culture.
The word autism almost means Rain Man. That's what it means now.
Yeah, essentially. And it's just and I think that media has got a part to play in it, because if there were accurate media portrayals about the struggles of having a mental disorder, of having mental illness, of having neurodivergent condition, they would realise that it is not this trendy, quirky thing to have. It
doesn't need glorified.
No, definitely not. And don't get me wrong, like, while we should focus on the strengths of people, you know, who are neurodivergent, at the same time, we also need to highlight that these people genuinely struggle with things like, and I can say, and this, I'll say this as someone who is quite comfortable with their status as someone with ADHD. I would not wish this on my worst enemy. Like, on my worst days, I would not wish what I have to go through, the overwhelm, the frustration, the not being able to do things that other people can do. I would not wish that on anyone. And so I think people who are quick to identify, like, oh, look at me, I'm ADHD, I'm so quirky, or this has been going on for ages, like, this isn't a new thing, or like, oh, like, I skip breakfast, therefore I must have an eating disorder, or my moods are up and down, therefore I'm bipolar. That has always existed, and I think that the media has got such a big part to play in that, because any person that has an illness or a disorder that genuinely makes their life difficult, because I do not want this is not a quirky thing to have, and so I think some people do, because, so, like, the people on TikTok, for example, who think oh yeah, like I must have this, or go on social media and think like, this is quirky, this is this, whatever. It tends to come from teenagers, like what I've noticed. And the thing is, though, a lot of these teenagers do have something.
Yeah.
But because they don't have that representation in the media, like, and they don't have that knowledge and they don't have that support, they automatically go to, like, it is quirky and it is this and it's romanticized. And I'm totally against, like, romanticization, because I think you can draw on the strengths, you know, and what makes someone with a neurodivergent condition or a mental health disorder good, without downplaying how detrimental it can be.
Well, it's almost like offensive if someone's like, "Hey, look at me, I'm so quirky because I have like anxiety."
Yeah,
and meanwhile, there's someone over there who's like, "This is fucking killing me."
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And it is almost like, it's almost offensive. It's like, I
remember, like, this just popped the top of my head. I remember in Tumblr, because if anyone who's been on Tumblr, like, it was an absolute shit show.
Is it
like,
still going? Is Tumblr still going?
It is.
Jesus, I wonder what
But
kind
they
of
took all the
cesspit it
porn
looks
off,
like
so
now.
people don't want to
Did
go on it
they?
anymore.
No, that's a shame. The porn was the best bit about Tumblr.
Well, speak for yourself. But no, I remember there was this quote that was floating around on Tumblr back in the day, and it was something like, "Suicidal people are fallen angels that just want to go home."
What?
And I remember someone commented being like, "Please, for the love of God, can we stop this absolute shit show like this?" Like, when you're suicidal, you don't think, "Oh, I'm an angel that wants to go home." You think, "I can't get out of bed. I can't function. I can't eat. I don't have the will to live anymore." Like, it's...
Well, there was a girl in the media recently. I remember seeing that. It was probably a couple of months ago, and she was she committed suicide. I think she was only a young schoolgirl. She committed suicide, and when they went on social media, she'd like saved, liked loads of those kind of quotes and images, glorifying suicide, glorifying depression, glorifying mental health. And it's great to have an awareness to it, but do not, for the love of fucking God, glorify it and make it out to be this thing that you should almost aspire to have, because you join a club. No. Like, I was saying this to some, like, obviously I was saying this to a few of my friends. I was saying, like, people nowadays, we really struggle for a sense of identity. We really do. And the problem is, when you see these things online that resonate with a certain part of you, right? So you could just be sad and going through a shit time, right? And you see a post and a group dedicated to people who have depression, right? You then get validated for your feelings. Your feelings get validated. You join that group and you have a sense of identity around this. But you can't. But then you're feeding this sadness. You're feeding this feeling that would be better if it fucked off and went away. But you're feeding this because it feeds your sense of identity. And I think a lot of people do that now. They see something that is trendy, I guess you could say, or makes them fit in because they don't feel like they fit in anywhere. They find this group of people, they resonate with it, and they stick to that. And I think we all have these little camps now. Right? I mean, you could even say that about us being in like a self-development world. Like, people look at us self-development gurus and like, they think they're better than everyone because they read a few books or they visited a Tony Robbins seminar. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, no, like, that's not how we look. But we obviously resonated with a certain part of self-help. We resonated with development, and that's why we're in this group. But there's some groups that I feel like people resonate with that aren't helpful at all.
Okay, can you give me an example
of a group?
Or just something that I can analyze.
Well, I mean, if you were to find a group of people who, I mean, there's not one that I can particularly point out by name, right? But I've seen groups on Facebook. Obviously, you look at the Tumblr post that we said. On social media, you do get these people who do post about suicide, who post about depression, who post about whatever. And then there's people who comment on that saying, "Oh, I feel the same, hope you're okay, hon," etc., etc. And then you meet these people, then these two people get together, they talk about their misery, and then they get validation from each other because both their feelings are aligned. And then they'll end up finding more people. They'll make these... you tend to find a lot of people like that who... I feel like truly depressed people, like, obviously I don't have depression or anything like that, wouldn't post that sort of stuff on social media. Personally, I don't know whether that's correct. You can come with that, but I wouldn't say that people would post. Maybe it's a private blog to express the feelings to get that out, but I don't feel like somewhere like Facebook or Instagram or something like that would be the best place. I don't feel like someone that truly feels that way would post that. However, I can obviously see the appeal of doing so. I was very much one of those people who posted lyrics when they were younger to describe their feelings. But obviously, I feel like doing that, it just isn't helpful. And obviously you get it's good to find your tribe. I'll never dispute that. It's good to find people who have the same as you. But if it's in a bad or sort of negative way, I mean, having depression sucks ass.
Yeah.
Suffering with anxiety sucks ass. Not having a place to go sucks major ass.
Yeah.
Right? And if you can find those people, hallelujah. But if those people if it's just simply this rumination on how you feel and there's no actual development, there's no actual let's try and treat it, let's work together, let's try and build each other back up.
Yeah.
And it's just this, like you said, like people with depression or fallen angels just want to go home. If it's just that repeated and repeated and repeated in these groups and cycles, and anyone who speaks out about that is bad and bigoted or whatever. It's like that's not a healthy group to be in. You want to find those groups who are, depression help, like depression relief, something like that.
I think for me personally, because like I said, I sort of like take a middle point in this. So I think a lot of depressed people who are like really struggling with mental health, because depression takes a toll on your communication as well. Like if you're depressed, like it is not going to make your communication style the most optimal, right? When you're desperate, right, to the untrained eye, like, someone who's really desperate and who is really struggling and having suicidal thoughts, right, they might think that, right, I need to put this on Facebook, I need to put this on Instagram, because the idea of going to someone on a one-to-one level as a friend and being like, look mate, like I'm really struggling, is daunting. Do
you think men struggle with that more than women, or do you think it's about equal?
I think they struggle with it in different ways,
right?
So I feel like with women we tend to be more likely to open up to other female friends and male friends as well. Like we tend to see things as like, oh well, sharing is caring. Like I feel like that is definitely more of an element for women. But I think for men, because I think men's mental health has a really long way to go though, and I say that as a woman.
I would agree.
Yeah, because I think the statistic is the cause and lead of death for a man under 40 is himself, is suicide. So I think from a male perspective, if they see a woman go on Facebook and be like, look girls, I'm really struggling, like I'm really depressed, I'm suicidal, whatever it is, and because women tend to have that
nurturing,
sort of,
caring
tend
vibe?
To be like, and they tend to sort of flock together. Like I've never seen a female friend group where one woman's been struggling and then all of the other women have gone, well, guess it's not my problem.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with guys, and this comes like from an interpersonal perspective as well. Like men are simply not given the tools that they need to have a conversation about mental health, and this is starting on basic things like depression, anxiety, like let alone things like that are a bit more serious, like major depressive disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, personality disorders, whatever it is. Like, and women struggle with this as well. Like we are simply not equipped as a society to have productive conversations about mental health. And I tell you why, because I think there's one thing in the sort of the self-help and the motivation space, and not just in that space, but this is becoming fairly mainstream on things like Instagram as well, is this idea of like, if someone is dragging you down, cut them off. Like
right,
they're toxic.
Yeah.
So, but it's almost being taken to the nth degree. So, like, because of a lot of these Instagram buzzwords like toxic and boundaries, which have a very valid part to play.
I actually hate the word toxic,
which are like valid things. Now, if someone who is really, really struggling does open up to someone and goes like, look, mate, or look, girl, like, I'm really like struggling, we're not equipped, like we're not given the tools to sort of deal with that. Like we can learn, and over time, like we learn how to listen to people and we learn how to validate people. But if you're sort of, so say for example, if you're depressed or you're really anxious and you're surrounded by really positive people and you want to share what's on your mind, it's very common for them to go, well, they're not going to understand what I'm talking about, I'm not going to feel validated. If I say I'm really struggling with this, they might think that a really positive person is going to go, well, all you need to do is meditate and exercise and things like that. Which again, there is value to those conversations, but a lot of the time we just want to feel validated, like we just want to feel like someone can relate to what's happening, because sometimes we just need a friend, we just need someone to listen. We don't necessarily need like a 5-step plan on how to fix the problem.
I think men and women's mental health needs to be treated differently, and I think what you just described there is very much how women would see it. I think for men as well, men love actionable steps. We love people to be like, this is what you need to do. We love the logical side of it.
Yeah.
That's why I said in this with Sam when Sam was here the other week, and we talked about relationships, and we said that for a man, if you're listening to a woman's problems, you got to say, don't try and fix it straight away. Say, do you need me to listen or do you need me to help?
Yeah.
And that's a very important distinction. And the problem I think a lot of people do is they try and treat men's mental health and women's mental health as mental health in general, whereas they both need very different types of care, of treatment and attention. It's very different for each, and it's very hard. I don't think, I personally don't believe one's ever going to fully understand the other.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I feel like it's very much like, for men, I always say, if you are struggling, find men, and for women, find women. Unless they're trained. You know what I mean? Like, if you were a man and you got a female psychologist or therapist, well, that's fine. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, in your friendship group, if you have an issue, talk to the men as a man.
Okay, so me as a female, we've been friends for a very long time. If I had a problem, would you want me to tell you? If I was struggling, would you want me to come to you?
I would want you to come for me if you needed, like, that my kind of help, as in a male type of, as in, I mean, obviously, as a man you can listen. I'm not saying don't listen to a woman's problems, but the idea of trying to fully understand where they're at is you're probably not going to reach that same level as if they were speaking to their female friends. It's just not going to happen, I don't think.
I think for me personally is that I mean, I had struggles with this with my own partner, because I remember, like, I mean, my partner's 8 years older than me, so we're talking about different generation, let alone like opposite sex. And I remember, like, I would go to him with something and I'd be like really, really upset, and I would just want to get it out, and he would be like, right, well, this is what you need to do, and maybe you should do this. And then I would get, but from a woman's point of view, we almost take that as, why aren't you listening to me?
Exactly, you
know what I mean? But then
it's very, as all the men are listening going, that's the fucking problem.
But at the same time, on the flip side of that, often if and I'm saying this for like a heterosexual relationship, so with man, woman, whereas I've noticed that on the other side, if a guy goes to a girl and you know, and he's like really struggling, so like, oh yeah, like I've had a bad day at work or whatever, the woman will go, oh, that sounds like really sad, and we'll listen to them, and the guy's almost like, why aren't you giving me advice?
I'd probably say
that,
and
and the girls are like, well, I'm just trying to listen, I'm just trying to let you get it off your chest. So there needs to be some sort of, and that's why there's definitely value in what you just said, and when you have a conversation of, do you need me to listen or do you need me to fix it? And it's this thing where, but this is the thing though, like, you also get women who take that approach to things. I know women who when they have a female friend go to them and be like, right, well, you should do this and you should do this. But at the same time, I also know men who take a step back and listen as well. So it's not like a one size fits all, but I see the value in what you're saying.
Yeah, obviously you'll get men that are tend to lean in more feminine ways. You get obviously women who lean in more masculine ways. That you're always going to get the exception to the rule kind of thing. So I understand that completely.
But no, like I think a lot, like what you just said, like about finding other depressed people, and it becomes like a group sort of thing.
It becomes basically, for lack of a better term, a circle jerk, doesn't it? It becomes this like this bounce back and forwards. Oh, you're depressed? Let me tell you how depressed I am. And for if you were to go to a proper meeting, like you go for Alcoholics Anonymous and everyone's there to kind of get over their thing, that's absolutely fine. And you will need, if you have those feelings, you will need to share them. It's going to happen, right? Yeah. But if you're just talking back and forth, you might as well just be shouting at a wall, because it's not going to go anywhere. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I mean, my philosophy on this is, you can't have one extreme or the other. You need to find a balance. So have your grieving time. If you're going through something or you're really struggling with something, have your space to just get it off your chest and do whatever impulsive decisions or whatever it is that you're going to do because you're hurting, right? And you just get it off and you grieve. But then once you've had your grieving space, that's when you go, right, I've expressed it, like I've cried about it enough, I've talked about it enough, like I need to take action. Yeah. Whereas if you were to be like all cry and no action, you're never going to get anywhere. But if you're all action and no cry, you're going to really burn yourself out.
This is what I said. So I called it the two leg analogy, stand on two leg analogy. And what I say is basically, you look at the left leg, you stand on one leg, and it's like, I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to get it out, I'm going to vent. You're just going to fall. Yeah. Right? It's as if you stand on the right leg and you're just I'm going to ignore these feelings, I'm going to barrel through action is king. Yeah. Like, I'm a big action is king kind of guy. Yeah. But if you just stand on that right leg, you're going to topple. That's why you need both. Like, I have a group chat with a few of my good mates who I trust with my life, and we always share stuff in there. I set it up so I had that sort of tribe to talk to, and there's the guys in there are really understandable, and and we'll go, oh, like, I'm having this trouble, or I need advice on this, like, and they'll be like, what's up, tell me some context, and it's like paragraph, you know, of like, this is what's going on, and they go, okay, I see how you feel, I can understand this, and it's like a little bit of understanding, and then here's what I would recommend you do, and then the other guys pitch, and that has worked perfectly. That is honestly my favorite thing about that group chat, and I think every guy needs something like that, like not a quote unquote toxically masculine bro talk where it's like just go off, bro, it doesn't matter, bro, just go lift some weights, bro, and it's like, go lift some weights because it'll fucking help you, it will definitely 100% help you feel better, but it's like, leave the bro talk at home. Don't be one of those guys. If you're a guy, listen, don't be one of those guys that's just all bro talk and like, oh, let's go to the gym, bro, you don't fucking need that bitch, and you know all this. I don't even know how bro talk anymore. I'm so past that stage.
Well, that's a good sign.
I'm like, what does bro talk even mean now? But you know what I mean? It's like, don't be one of these guys who just like, you know, let's go for a fucking fucking pissed or whatever. It's like, if one of my friends said when I'm in a depressed mood, let's go get pissed, they wouldn't be my friend anymore. I'd be like, no. If you say to me, let's go lift some weights, let's go do some heavy ass squats, I'm like, that's so much better for my mental health. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
What's it like for women? Do you have a group chat yourself, or do you know anyone who has?
So for me personally, I find that, because like you said, like men like to sort of offer like the 5-step plan of how to get over the problem. For me personally, and I can't speak for other women, like this is just me personally, I find that when I get things off my chest, so say if we have like a girly group chat, or I just want to rant and I just want to get it out, once I've had my rant, I know how to fix my own problem. So I feel like when men, which comes from a completely like benevolent place.
Sometimes it just gives you clarity as well, though, I think.
And they come from like a totally benevolent place, and so when men try to be like, right, well, here's what you do to fix a problem, not me personally, but I think the tendency for some women is to think they don't trust me to solve my own problem. So it's like, I just need to get this off my chest, and once it's out, I've then got the clarity to go, right, okay, like I know how to proceed. So I feel like it's such a multifaceted thing. Like, men tend to act like this, or women tend to feel like this, but this is why we need open conversations. This is why we need conversations between men and women. Like what me and you are doing now needs to happen more. Like there's two major parts of society that aren't talking to each other, and that needs to change.
100%. So in terms of going back to the ADHD thing, because you kind of went on a tangent, what sort of treatments are available for someone like that? Like obviously you've been through some of the process yourself, like what is some of the treatments that are available? What do you personally recommend trying for someone who, you know, is listening to this, who is neurodivergent, who has autism or ADHD, whatever's on that list of disorders, would you say?
Yeah, I mean,
what is the word? Because I felt bad saying disorders.
Disorder.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I know I highlighted this in my talk, but disorder, in order for something to be a disorder, it needs to have like a major impact in your life. Like it needs to impact you to the point where you're struggling to function on a daily basis. But disorder for me is almost like you're struggling to do things that society deems normal, like that you need to do. Whereas for me, I see it as a difference, but I'm not, like I said in my speech, I'm not disabled by what's up here, I'm disabled by what's in my environment. Like my environment is not good for me. So I've done another ADHD thing. I've gone off on a tangent.
Okay. I was asking what treatments are available for you.
So I'm on medication, and I'm very, very open about the fact that I'm on medication. I feel like medication is such a stigmatized thing, and even though it's getting better, I feel like in the self-help world, it's almost like an elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about.
I would agree.
Yeah, because for me, this might be a controversial statement. If you have a condition or a mental illness or disorder or whatever it is that can be treated by medication, and you don't take it, but you also don't do anything to take the place of the medication, that is a form of self-harm. In my opinion.
Yeah, interesting.
Because so for example, just because I treat mine, like I decided to go down the medication route, which 100% worked for me. It was almost as if someone took my old brain out and put a new brain in, right? Me with old brain would not be able to like sit talking to you here now, and I wouldn't have been able to go as far as I have at work without it. But for those that don't decide to go down the treatment route, it's one of those things where, like, just because if you don't want to take medication, that is absolutely fine. Like, that's your choice. But you need something to replace that. So exercise, exercise is such a huge thing. And for ADHD people specifically, or anyone that struggles with dysregulation, high intensity exercise is a huge thing. Like, exercise to the point where your muscles become exhausted, like, your brain is going to really spike with dopamine, and that is going to last throughout the day. It's going to sustain you throughout the day.
Yeah, so you want some dopamine, go do a 90 kilogram squat or a 100 kilogram squat. That will give you a dopamine spike.
Yeah, 100%. No, 100%. Things like breath work, and obviously meditation is beneficial for all people, but I'm talking deep breath work, like like an hour-long session of breath work and really focusing, because that stimulates dopamine in your brain, because your brain is almost in like an altered state of consciousness. So that is a huge thing. Learning how to work with your ADHD, that is a huge thing as well. So one thing I always say to people is that, because you have to go through an unlearning process, because for the longest time until I was diagnosed, I was convinced that I was broken in some way. I was like, I'm lazy. That's another thing. I don't. There's no such thing as lazy. That's a very controversial opinion. Unmotivated exists.
I think I would even go one step further and say just lack of energy.
Yeah.
But you have to create energy.
Yeah.
First.
And and again, it's a dysregulation of energy, right? So if you know that your energy is going to spike at a certain time during the day, work with it. If you know that your energy tends to spike later on at night, right? Fuck going to bed at the time where everyone else does. If your energy spikes at that time, make the most of it. Make adjustments to your environment, work around it. Because if you don't, you're going to burn yourself out. So that's why I always say people with ADHD will struggle with consistency, because our energy levels are totally different from one day to another. So I don't go for consistency. I don't strive for consistency. I strive for sustainability. Something that you can sustain. So for example, if I say to myself every night before I go to bed, I'm going to do a face mask, and I'm going to take all my makeup off, and I'm going to, and I'm going to wash my hair, and I'm going to do all this, like, as a form of self-care. If I say to myself, I'm going to do that every night before bed, that's not going to last more than a few days, because my energy is going to be totally different on different days. Whereas if I say to myself, at the very least, I'm going to wipe all of my makeup off before I go to bed, that's sustainable, because if I'm having a low energy day, I can do that. If I'm having a high energy day, like, I can do a bit more.
Is that not because, just obviously correct me if I'm wrong, just side tangent, is that not, if you were to say I'm going to take my makeup off, rather as opposed to I'm going to take my makeup off and I'm going to do a face mask, is that not just because one is more, beneficial to your life? Like, you wouldn't sleep with makeup on. It's probably not a good idea for you or for a woman, or versus you could potentially go without doing a face mask, but you can't go without taking your makeup off. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? Yes. Is it because one's like almost mandatory, one's like,
I don't even see it as I mean first off, if you're a woman, like, if you go to bed with makeup on, obviously, like, it's not a good idea, but I'm just talking about in terms of things that you want to do. So for me, I know that I should probably wash my face. I know I should probably take my makeup off and do all these things before I go to bed. But if I can just set myself the bare minimum, be like, right, at the very minimum, I'm just going to take it off, right? But not beat myself up over it if I don't, because my energy is so different, and my attention is going to be different, and my emotions are going to be different. Like, I can't predict from one day to the next what my energy is going to be like. Not beat myself up if I don't, because neurotypical people, the neurotypical brain, is designed to form habits. You've heard that saying, like, it takes, 21 days to form a habit?
21 days. It's definitely more. It's 100% more than that, but yeah.
But dopamine plays a part in that, because you get a dopamine hit every time, like, you do something.
Yeah.
Whereas with an ADHD brain, because we have a dysregulation of dopamine, it is not as easy for us to make habits. There is right, if you're ADHD and you try to make a habit, there is a 100% relapse rate. And it's just accepting you are going to relapse. You are going to have a day where you don't do it. And it's picking yourself up and go, I can get back on that thing that I was doing. Right? It's not beating yourself up over it.
Well, one thing I was told the other day, actually, and I really loved, and I'll share with you as well, is a lot of people say it's a constant battle to do this. It's a constant battle.
Yeah.
I'm a constant battle with myself, right? Yeah. Change the language to it's an ongoing effort.
Yeah.
And I heard that and I was like, oh.
You know what it is? And I'm really glad you brought that up, because if there's one thing that I've started to do is that, because your subconscious brain, I mean, like, a really good friend of mine, Nina Kundi, shout out Nina if you're watching this, who is absolutely incredible. she taught me one thing was that the subconscious brain doesn't know right from wrong. Whatever you feed it, it will look for because to keep you alive.
It's the reticular activation system.
Yeah,
as well,
yeah.
The RAS, yeah.
You put it a lot more sophisticated than what I
Yeah,
did.
the RAS is basically selective focus. It's what you feed it with. Like if someone says to you, look for red cars, you're probably going to look for red cars. It's like when you start seeing, like, you start thinking about a certain thing and you just start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
That's like,
and you'd be surprised, like, how much of your language, which can be unintentional, feeds into your subconscious brain. So one thing that I've stopped doing, and this is something really, really simple, when I'm finding something hilarious, I've stopped saying, oh, I'm dying, oh, I'm dead. And it's such like a stupid little thing, but like I said, the subconscious brain doesn't know you're joking. Your subconscious brain doesn't know right from wrong. So then your brain is going to look for symptoms that you're dying. So like if you say, oh, I'm dying, you're going to feel in your body like you are dying. Instead I go, oh, it's just to say, if you told me a hilarious joke, like I'll go, oh, I am living for that. And it's mad. It's such a stupid little thing that works. But it's almost like...
It just changed the mood in the room when you... Yeah, it does. It definitely does. We say something in the gym as well where people go, oh, I'm starving.
Yeah.
It's like, are you? Are you a child in Ethiopia? Are you fucking starving? Or are you just a little bit hungry because you haven't eaten in a couple of hours? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Language plays a massive part.
No, I totally agree. And like you can almost almost do the flip thing. So like, for example, if there's one thing I've always said to myself to stop doing, because I understand why people do it, but I remember when I was first diagnosed and I started recognizing why I did the things that I did because of ADHD, I would almost try and overcompensate and over-explain. So my partner would be like, oh, why haven't you done the dishes? I'd be like, oh, sorry, it's my ADHD. Which is a reasonable explanation, but then I did it to the point where it's like, oh, sorry, I did that, it's my ADHD. And it got to the point where, because I'm telling myself I do this because of my ADHD, it almost becomes like, oh, I like the colour blue because of my ADHD. And so it's a really hard balance because you need to recognise, yes, some things you are going to struggle with because in my case, I have ADHD. But you need to find the balance between like not burning yourself, like understanding your limits, understanding what you do as a result of what you have. So if I had no knowledge of what of what my struggles are, I'm going to burn myself out completely. Whereas if I tell myself I can't do this because of my ADHD, I'm not going to get out of bed. So the way I'm almost looking at it is that just because you can't do something perfect, it doesn't mean it's not worth doing at all. Yes, some things I am going to really struggle with because of my ADHD, like, and things like spreadsheets. I'm fucking terrible at spreadsheets. I don't know about you.
It's funny, Yvonne, when she was in the church, she was like, I love spreadsheets.
But just because I'm bad at it and because I know I struggle at it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. Like, doing something badly is better than not doing it at all, and that's a really hard thing for a neurodivergent person to
perfection doesn't exist. My friend Luca Daniel, shout out to Luca, used to always say to me, "Is like perfection is the lowest standard because for most people who claim to be perfectionists are just procrastinators in disguise. Because perfection doesn't exist and it just stops you from doing anything. Done is better than perfect. It's for anyone."
Yeah,
I believe.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think for me as well, like I had to stop looking at the things that I struggled with as a moral failure. Like there's this very sort of undercurrent, like if you can't keep your space tidy and if you can't do the dishes, if you can't tidy your room and if you can't do this, it's seen as a moral failure, and it's not. It's about making your space work for you. So for example, if you work better knowing that the dishes are cleaned and that the living room's tidy and all of this, great.
Yeah.
But if you don't, because I struggle with something called object permanence. Unless something is in my immediate periphery, it may as well not exist. If I'm not looking at the dishes in my head, the dishes don't exist, right?
If it's not visible, you'll forget.
So it's about having like self-compassion for yourself. I realise I've just gone on for a million different tangents there.
Fine, keep going.
But
it's good. But so the one thing that and we'll kind of wrap with this because I know this is one of the main things that we want to talk about was workplace.
Yeah.
So mental health, neurodiversity in the workplace. Obviously, that's a big part of what you're aiming to do now is sort of change the way we see neurodiversity in the workplace, make it more accessible. Is that the right word? Accessible for people with neurodiversity. So what do you think, first of all, in the workplace needs to kind of change in your view for neurodivergent people to better adapt to the workplace? What needs to kind of change?
Okay, so not necessarily what needs to change, like not necessarily like a massive overhaul of what the traditional workplace is, but making adjustments for people who are struggling and not seeing them as being given special treatment. So for example, one of the adjustments that I have at work is that if I go for an interview, I have to have the interview questions in advance. And I can already tell like the cogs turn in people's minds to go like, oh well, it's an unfair advantage. And I'm like, well no, it's not, because, and I'll tell you why, because the average person in an interview, I mean, interviews are stressful as they are, but like say for example, a neurotypical person can perform a 7 out of 10 at an interview on a good day, right? On a good day, I can perform at a 3 out of 10 with interviews, because it requires a lot of recall and a lot of complex information at the drop of a hat, which, and as you can tell from this podcast, I've gone off tangent many a time, so it's really
podcasts do that, man.
It's really difficult to stick to one thing, especially the question. So an adjustment helps. So people might think, oh well, you having the questions in advance, that would take you from a 3 to a 10, and then it's an unfair advantage. It's like, it's not. If everyone else is at a 7, this takes me to a 7 as well when I'm a 3. So it makes it an equal playing ground, because equality and equity are two different things. Because if you treat everyone the same, you know, the level at which they're at are all going to raise, but they're still going to be different. So you're trying to sort of level it out. So for me, if I'm in a meeting at work, because like I really struggle with like auditory information. So if I'm say in a Teams meeting with someone, and they're giving me instructions to do a task, or they say like, can you go away and do this? But like, yeah, no problem. As soon as that Teams call is over, it's gone. Like, it's completely gone. So one of the adjustments I have is that my manager sends me like a follow-up bullet point list of all the things that I need to do, because when I've got something physical there, it's something concrete. It's not abstract, like the memory of what was said.
So I'm guessing you can't make notes at the same time as listening. Is that something that you write?
Because I tell you why. Because if I'm in a Teams meeting with someone and I'm trying to like take in what they're saying, like I can't multitask to save my life, because then it's almost like, right, do you want me to focus on taking the notes, or do you want me to focus on what you're saying? Like, it's really hard to do both. And at the same time, I'm making sure, am I making eye contact enough? Am I like doing all the social cues right? Am I like nodding my head? Am I doing this? And so sometimes in the moment it's easy to pay attention and you absorb it in the moment, but then afterwards it's like, oh crap, because recall is a big problem. Sometimes as well, I find this, not so much for me, although I do struggle with it to an extent, autistic people, because they tend to take things literally. And I mean that in the sense that neurotypical people, when they talk to each other, they can sense the intuition or the intention behind like what they're saying, whereas autistic people often struggle with that.
But take it at face value, don't they?
Yeah. So for example, say, I mean, I'm not being diagnosed as autistic, but say, for example, if I was, and someone said to me, like, oh, can you take the dog out? I'd be like, yes, I can. As in, I have the ability to take the dog out. But what they're actually saying is, would you mind please taking the dog out? And so in interview questions, like interviews in particular, if you ask an autistic person, like, oh, tell me a bit about yourself, the intention behind that is like, oh, tell me about the traits and the skills and the experience that you have to fit the role. Autistic person's not going to say that.
Like, I like Game of Thrones. I like
which is exactly what I've done in interviews, by the way. So it's being direct with communication. It's being direct about what's expected, because autistic people, ADHD people, neurodivergent people in general communicate very, very differently to neurotypical people. I think for ADHD specifically, as a manager, and this is going to be a tough thing for some people to hear, is like, do not expect someone with ADHD to be at the top of their game for 8 hours a day. Like, all throughout the day, they're going to have.
I'll just interject. I don't think anyone should be expected to be at the best for 8 hours a day. That's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, the human brain can only focus continually for about 3 hours.
And my brain starts to die at about 3 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just think the modern workplace in general, even for neurotypical people, is difficult, because we as a species have not evolved to, and I'm talking specifically about, is the word sedentary sitting down, office jobs. We as a species have not evolved to sit down in front of a screen and type for 8 hours a day go home, have 5-6 hours spare time, go to sleep, wake up and do the whole thing over again. So this is why I'm such a big advocate of things like the 4-day working week, because like a lot of people are gonna like listen to this and think like, 4-day working week, like it means like people are gonna slack off, like they're not gonna do the job. If anything, it helps because they've got an incentive, because they tend to be more well rested, they have more time off, they're more motivated to do the things that they want to do at work. So if you think about this in terms of history, I'm a history student, obviously, so I love history.
Obviously.
So Industrial Revolution, right? So peak of the Industrial Revolution, you were expected to work 20 hours a day. And there's 24 hours in a day, so you're expected to work for 20 hours and have 4 hours sleep, right? So you were having like, 100-day week, right? So that was like mid-1800s. Fast forward to like 100 years after, it then went down to the 40 hour working week, which is a reduction in 60 hours per week. So now when I advocate for the 4-day working week, so say for example, if we went from 40 hours to say 30 hours a week, that's only 10 less hours a week. You know, we went from 100 hours a week to 40 within a few hundred years. Like, what's another 10 hours going to do? So like it's a huge, like, we spend all of our time at work, unless, like, and this goes for self-employed people as well, but I mean specifically for people who work office jobs and who work for an organisation or a company like what I do. Like, the fact that you're just expected to put your entire life, like your entire energy into it, which again, like, is expected, like, understand where it comes from. But as a species, we have not evolved to sit down in front of a computer screen for 8 hours a day. And then when people can't do that, especially like neurodivergent people or people who have mental health issues, we're seen as the disordered ones. We're seen as the ones that are not normal because we can't do something that we have not evolved to do. And like, because like I said, like, we spend like a third of our lives at work. So for something that we're going to spend potentially 30 years of our life doing, is it not best to make it more manageable? Is it not best to so that you are being more productive?
The problem I have, and I'm quite I don't know what you would say, skeptical or sort of nihilistic even about it, is if you cut, would you say, when you say 4-day work, would you cut that, is that in every sector, in the vast majority of jobs, would that be right? So I would say probably if you did that, a lot of what we know as life would suffer, because you need those people who are constantly, you need the cogs and everything working like that. And unfortunately, some people need to fit in those roles. I personally believe, and obviously it's quite like, well, it's not a nice thing to say, but that's how things have ran for so long. And obviously, no one knows what would happen if you change that. Really. We're just guessing kind of that. Is it Sweden or somewhere like that tried the 4-day work week, and they've got good results from it. And I'm like, ooh, an extra day off sounds great, because I can do another podcast. I can do stuff that I like. I can fucking do that. And obviously the way it worked sort of pre-50s was man went to work, woman stayed at home, right? And that worked fine when everything in the house was done and everything was bought, the shop was done, the house was clean, etc., and the man brought home the money. Now you've got two people working. That chick in the house gets completely fucking thrown out the window, because the people aren't there all the time. Like, if you work, like, if both you and your partner work like, 8 hours a day, a standard, right, plus like a couple hours commute or something like that, the last thing you guys fucking want when you come in is to clean the house or do all the shit that you forgot about, right? And that extra day would massively help. But on the other side, if you've got a massive firm where people need access to, we're already talking a lot of businesses who ring up now and they're still blaming COVID for understaffing. Right, we're understaffed. Everywhere's understaffed. Everybody ring up understaffed, right? You cut that down to 4-day work week. Obviously, you would have people work shifts. It wouldn't just be every fucking person in the country has a Thursday off. Like, it wouldn't work like that. You know what I mean? But like, you cut that down, a lot of businesses will probably suffer, and you probably get a lot of people would complain about the very thing that they want the most, which is, do you know what I mean? Like, well, if your doctors went down to 4 days a week, right? Oh, sorry, your doctor's not in today, but I really need to say I'm sorry, the 4-day working week policy. It's like, there is going to be that sort of, people need stuff now. Like, your Amazon Prime isn't going to come because we don't have delivery. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's...
No, and like I totally understand where that perspective is coming from. Like, I totally get what you mean. But at the same time, it's like, when I say 4-day working week, I don't mean every single person in the country only work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Because say if you have a firm or whatever business it is that you could have one person working say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you could have another person working Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? So you're not losing the support that your business needs to give, especially if you're like a 24-hour business or like emergency services or something like that. But funnily enough, so there was a study done in America quite recently, and I think they just took like, I think it was like I'm probably going to really butcher this study, I can't remember, but I think they took like the top 100 companies in the country in America, and they trialed them with the 4-day working week and said, right, we're going to do an experiment. All of you are going to trial the 4-day working week for 3 months, and if it doesn't work, that's absolutely fine. You can go straight back to it afterwards, just to see what would happen. 95 of them kept doing it afterwards. The productivity went up because their employees were a lot more engaged and a lot more well rested. They were then being more productive, engaging more, therefore producing more profit for the company. Because like you're not going to have happy customers without happy employees. Like that's the way that I look at it.
I agree.
And I think it's almost like a roll-on effect as well, because like everyone is, say for example, if you're working like a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, right, and you're wrecked, you're worn out, and you need to ring up a utility company, for example, because you need to complain about a bill, right, because you're exhausted and and you're overworked, you are more likely going to be really, really snappy with that person on the phone, and you're going to expect a hell of a lot more. Whereas if you're someone who is working a 4-day working week and you feel a bit more rested and things like that, you're not going to be as cranky with those people, which then in turn are going to make them employees happier, which are going to make the customers happier, and it's like a roll-on effect. So I totally understand the criticisms of like where it's coming from, because people are almost like really scared of like rapid societal change, which to an extent like this would be, but it's for the better. I think people are often so scared of change that they're more willing to stick to something detrimental because it's what they're used to.
The devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Exactly. So I mean, to be fair, like we are like a fair way away from it. I mean, like private companies and private organizations have a lot more scope to do this because they make profit, they can stretch their budgets a bit more and they can operate a bit more freely than what public organizations can. So we are a fair bit away from getting that, but I'm very hopeful that we get there one day.
Especially with Carla Jackson at the charge.
Exactly.
Amazing. So listen, Carla, we are out of time for this episode. So where can people find you if they want to contact you? To maybe get you in to speak at their workplace. Okay. I'm going to push that. Get Carla in to speak at your workplace. Your employees will be more productive. They will be happier. And they can all talk about Game of Thrones afterwards. Of course. Where can people find you, Carla?
So I'm at Divergent Carla on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook. I'm just Carla Jackson Neurodiversity Educator on Facebook. Or if you want to email me directly, it's divergentcarla@gmail.com. So incredible.
Listen, I've learned so much from this podcast. I've had my brain tickled. I've learned a lot because this isn't something that I know a lot about. So it's become a lot of the things that I put forward today are things that maybe you've heard me like, he's one of those guys that thinks this, or he's uneducated.
The fact that you're willing to have a conversation about it makes all the difference.
I'm willing to be proven wrong, and the whole point of doing this podcast is I get to learn from the people that come on, because there's no point in me going, oh well, I know this, you just talk about this and I sit back in my chair, there's no point in doing that. Like I want to learn something, and I think this has definitely been a valuable podcast. So thank you very much for coming on, Carla. If you guys like this, obviously give Carla a follow, check out, email her as well, just say, hey, loved it. I'm sure she'll get back to you with a nice email as well. And give this podcast a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you're listening. And follow me on Instagram at AdamJamesProud. I'm also on Facebook as well. Send me a friend request and I'll promise to be nice. As long as you like my shit. So, until the next episode, guys, I'll see you all very, very soon.